I had them on line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them on line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for they prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the lead to see what's planted. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Boy, that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant and minus my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up on that red nose and fighter.
Yo, family, Black Power Media family. This is Jackie Luqmans.
And I am Uncle Baba Luqmans. Oh, I forgot I had this thing on. My bad.
And welcome to Luqman Nation and Black Power Media.
The most dangerous show on this social media network.
Mm-hmm.
Also on Black Power Media, which is the most dangerous show or the dangerous platform on social media. Now I got the...
All right, so look, we're going to have a good time tonight because, as usual, we Luqmans, we just kind of got curious about something that we saw. So we figured, you know what? We're going to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it with someone who has some expertise in it because as smart as we are, and we are smart, we're not experts.
So we've been told.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are hood smart, we are street smart, but we're also smart. So.
And one thing that we have is that old love.
I can't believe you brought that up.
Oh, man.
Okay, so we were with the last show we did. We were looking at the comments, and aside from the troll, which I have banned, by the way, so you won't see that troll anymore. Somebody posted, "Oh, I love to see old love," and you know,
right. we was old love. Then we were retired.
Then somehow we were retired
because we would be, and because we didn't stay mad. You know what I mean?
I guess.
So we were supposed to come on mad and angry and burn shit down. And because we was having a little bit of fun, so we're retired and then the old love and sweet couple.
Okay, fine. We'll be all that. But don't get it twisted. We ride deep over here in Luqman Nation and with our Black Power Media family.
But I will say this though, really, if that was intended as an insult, it wasn't. The thing of it is that we pray that you experience some of that old love.
Yeah, I mean, because he's kind of nice.
And she's kind of nice.
Yeah, he all right. I keep him. Yeah, don't come for
I
him.
can't complain.
Don't come for him. I'll cut you.
Yeah.
So
let me see. Before we go on, let me see. We got David Silberg. We got Super Pam Cakes. I like that.
Super Pam Cakes.
Safari, Melisizwe.
Mm-hmm.
And always
Leah Boggs, Easy D.
And Easy D, who Easy D pops up on a few of our platforms. So welcome Easy D, welcome everybody out there in Black Power Media family. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so we're going to get into this.
Yes, we are, and like we said, the main thing we're going to talk about tonight requires some expertise, and we're really not kidding about that. These are legal issues that I think. That we think need to be ironed out. We need to understand some things. And as smart as we are, we're not attorneys, but that guy is.
Yes.
This is Kamau Franklin. Welcome, Kamau. Kamau is the co-founder of Community Movement Builders down in Atlanta. Georgia, and he is the co-host of Renegade Culture Podcast. Kamau, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I'm not sure if I'm as smart as you've been telling people, so we'll see about that. But I love the old and the new love that y'all exhibit every time.
We'll take it, man. Love is love.
We'll take it. Just fake it until
we'll take
it. True.
So, like, before we get into the meat of this thing that we want to talk about, which is the COVID relief bill, which is actually, I guess, formally called the American Rescue Act of 2021. There are a couple other stories that have happened that are really, really important, and especially down there in Atlanta or in the area was, of course, the mass murder of at least 8 Asian people in the Atlanta area. Kamau, what is the latest that you've heard about that horrific mass shooting that resulted in the deaths of 8 Asian people? Or actually, that's not true. I think it's 8 people, 6 of whom are Asian, 1 white man and 1 white woman.
Yeah. Well, they caught a suspect, and they're fairly certain at this particular stage that the person that they caught, a white male, I think his name is Robert Aaron Long, is most likely responsible for the killings. I think a lot of this has to do with this person's, sex interest in terms of what so far as the public story, what's being claimed as what's behind the killings themselves. I think this is another indication, of course, of a couple of different things that we can look at. One, of course, is that, and I'm not suggesting that this person should have been killed by any means, but I think the idea that this person who had killed 8 people was apprehended by the police alive is another indication of what happens in our communities around people who get apprehended and how they get apprehended. I think some folks are, particularly mainstream media, talking about, I've seen some things on social media about how un-American it is to attack Asian folks, whereas America, through white supremacy, has a history of attacking, oppressing, marginalizing Asian people. And so this is no surprise. I think it's also no surprise that as COVID restrictions are starting to get lifted, some of these same mass murders and things that we were experiencing as a country that we live in are going to start popping back up, because we have this population, particularly of white working class males, who are mostly white supremacists, but have other reasons too, have begun, because of how they see how the country is going, their economic instability as they see it, obviously drug use, are going to sort of return to these things that haven't been as commonplace over the last year, but mass shootings and so forth. So I think all these things are now things that are now will probably be popping back up, things that have to be analyzed and talked about. Obviously, every sort of heartfelt sadness and best wishes goes out to the families of everyone who was killed today. But again, this person was apprehended. They're fairly certain, based on the evidence and circumstances, that this person most likely is the suspect that was supposed to be caught in this particular instance. And then we'll see what happens next.
And Kamau, what you just explained, if everything that you just said about the white male insecurities and everything that is sort of attached to this, if you was to make that into a picture, this guy resembled it. I mean, when I saw his mugshot, I'm saying, man, I mean, this guy looks, what a pathetic looking figure I said to myself. And this, what makes, I think, this such so newsworthy is that this is also in line with a lot of attacks on Asians across the country, and particularly in California. And it doesn't surprise me, all of the race baiting that was carried out by Trump and others, especially around the subject of the coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
But I think another thing that really strikes me is the hypocrisy of, especially the situation in Atlanta, and maybe the situations that's been happening to Asians all around. And it's this hypocrisy that whenever white people feel afraid, whenever they feel that something's not going their way, we've seen this on the January 6th attack on the Capitol, that it's okay for them to express their rage. It's okay for them to express their dissatisfactions. But but then when we have Black Lives Matter, when we talk about, as you mentioned, when we spoke about or when we reference police terror on the Black community, then somehow that's not a legitimate reason for us to take to the streets. So what do you think about all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is mixed up in the history of one, white folks being allowed to act not only in groups to take vengeance on things that they see as either issues in society or their racism around not having what they think is total control, and usually getting away with it as groups without the sort of attachment of like the whole white folks mean doing something means this, or a group of white folks doing something means that, right? And we have these situations when we have these mass shootings committed mostly by white males. They get away with it in the sense of it doesn't mean the whole group of white males is now looked upon as a group that needs to be profiled, watched, looked at, analyzed, and that kind of thing. Mainstream media and policing operations only do that for Black people, only do that for other folks of color, where there's this demonization, this stereotyping, and this racism. White folks don't get lumped in together, even though the history of white racism is clear and plain, and how white supremacy operates both as policy and as a violence against other folks of color, against folks of color, Black people, other folks, Asians in this particular case. And that history of white supremacy is totally ignored by mainstream media again, and by policing operatives, whether or not federal government, FBI, or local police. Is looked upon as this one person who has these particular problems and or issues, and we must examine it from a psychological point of view, as opposed to looking at sort of that, in this particular case, the group ethos that usually sort of stirs this up or gives people their rationales and reasons for why it's okay to kill in mass and to kill a certain group of people who look different from them.
Now, before we go further, I just want to remind the audience to like, share, subscribe, and if you haven't become a member of Black Power Media, please do. You hear us all the time talk about how your participation really determines whether this platform can go on. So, I enjoy the content when we're not doing the show, but I always have to remind myself to hit that like button. And so that way we can encourage to have more content. Jackie, what we were talking about as far as the way that Kamau I think brilliantly tied together the way that police the policing, when it comes to the white community or white suspects, it seems like the police know how to police. They know how to, And so now here we are at another situation with the George Floyd trial that's coming on, and I believe they're still picking the jury and everything. But I want to open this up for conversation. Is that there seems to be, and maybe it's because of our disappointment with the criminal justice system, but you're hearing rumblings now that somehow the fix is in. This is what we've been hearing.
I mean, I want to believe on one hand, Kamau, that, and I think we talked about this a little bit when you were a guest on By Any Means Necessary a few days ago. I want to believe that the folks in the court system and the legal system in Minnesota realize, in Minneapolis, realize that they need to at least be transparent, with this trial and the proceedings. And I think in being transparent, we're seeing things that look and smell real funky, right? And maybe this is just the way the system works, where people don't really participate in court proceedings, don't answer those jury summons, or never have been called to be on a jury, so they don't understand the the process of the preemptory strike and that kind of thing. But now, you've got this judge who has excused two jurors who have already been seated because he went back and asked the jury about their opinion on the $27 million settlement that the city of Minneapolis made with the Floyd family. Now, I am not an attorney, but you are. So I'm just from my non-attorney perspective, I am thinking, well, that's weird, because I've been on a few juries, and I've actually served on a very high profile jury, and that's a case I will never forget, and I wish I could forget that case because that was horrible. The what was his name? The Alaska senator who his name escapes me right now. But he died in a plane crash, and he was accused of stealing, money from, not reporting some, contributions to Congress. But the prosecution ended up not handing over all of the discovery, and that was found out after trial, after we found that man guilty. He was actually innocent. So I mean, it was really just really, really. It was a huge case. But I mean, so I get the whole thing about preemptory strikes, but it was really weird to me that you have juries, Kamau, who are seated. They've been selected. They've been approved by the prosecution and the defense. And then the judge comes back and asks the members of the jury, hey, this thing happened. What do you think about it? And then he decides, oh, I don't like the way you thought about that, and excuses two jurors because of that. Yeah. Is that unusual?
It's a little unusual. I mean, obviously the judge has a lot of latitude, right, in terms of asking questions, interjecting in the proceedings. But it is unusual once a jury is picked, unless there is some evidence discovered to show that there is going to be bias, or to show that there's a possible bias impact by those individual jurors, for a judge to go back and almost re-question jurors once they've been seated, particularly at this early stage of the proceeding. So yeah, I agree with you. I think, this case has to be watched carefully. I do think there are factors, in my opinion, that can suggest that a conviction is not unheard of in a case like this, or something that I wouldn't be surprised at, because I think that every now and then the system will throw one of its own under the bus to preserve what they think of as the integrity of their larger system. I think that probably happens not too often, but I can see, just because of the magnitude of a case like that that's happening. But of course, I don't hold out a lot of faith in by any stretch of the imagination, because as we talked about previously, probably another case that's very similar in terms of having a videotape documenting the killing of somebody on site. We can go all the way back to Rodney King, and that led to an acquittal. We can go back to Eric Gardner, where he was obviously choked out on camera, and the police was not prosecuted or not convicted in that case either. So what we have here is the possibility of a one individual being thrown away who's been obviously shown to be callous, and shown to be obviously committing that murder in plain sight. But that by no means, in my opinion, changes what happens in the multitude of these type of cases that involve race and police, where police are either not even at the grand jury indicted, and if they are indicted, whether jury and or judge trials, the vast majority are acquitted. And so that's still the system that we live under, where the criminal justice system protects police and policing institutions, whether it's the DA's office, the judge, and or the defense system, particularly with the unions and so forth, intervening. So we have a system here that's built to protect the police, to give them as much latitude as possible. And I think the judges are 95% of the time in on it also. And so, I think it'll be interesting to see what transpires. Either outcome won't necessarily surprise me in this particular case. But by no means does it mean that whether or not this person is convicted or not, that the justice system somehow is working in our favor. And I often say to folks that the justice system for the most part, works the way it was designed to work, which is to equip white folks, to criminalize Black people, and to particularly protect police officers in how they do policing on Black people.
And Kamau, I would, common sense would say that after the rebellion that happened immediately after the murder of George Floyd, and the ramifications of that, and especially what happened in Minneapolis, common sense would say, well, they surely don't want to relive that again. They surely don't want to put the fix in only to realize that this is just going to explode into probably a bigger rebellion. But then I'm reminded, as you had just reminded us, about Rodney King, and those of us who were around thought the same thing. This is an open and shut case. I mean, we're all looking at this. This was like the first time that that what we've been telling America was actually documented on film. And so we were like, hey, yeah, I mean, there's no way these cops are getting off. And then only to have them change the venue into an all-white jury out in Simi Valley. Right. And then what happened was all of our jaws dropped, when it was like they actually found him innocent. And even though the rebellion that took place after that, the 92 rebellion out in Los Angeles, still, that didn't change the way that the justice system operated. So, I mean, and still operate. So, so I'm glad that you brought that up, that even though here we are in 2020, 21, and Black folks who have this, just like you just expressed, the same fear that this system is going to screw us again. Yeah. And, but they don't care about the violence that ensue. But talking about police unions, Jackie, right? They had they arrested Kamau, 2 suspects on a January 6th assault, which led to the death of Officer Seekin or Sykin, I think his name is.
Sykin. Wow. Yeah, one of the pigs died because the pigs who stormed the Capitol killed him.
All due respect.
And and it's interesting because the media, the way the media is, corporate media is just crap. It is just, they never called not that we haven't seen it on CNN, haven't seen it on MSNBC, haven't seen it on the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or any of the corporate media outlets. They called the 2 people that they are charging with this cop's murder. They're charging him, they're saying that they assaulted this cop. Now, if I assault you and you die as a result of me assaulting you, guess what that is? That's murder. That's not assault. Assault is if I beat you up and you walk away, which I would never beat you up. Now, I'm just using his, don't get crazy. I would never beat you up. but I'm just, so I mean, it's this is another example, Kamau, of the fix being in, I think, where, we're seeing a lot of these folks who are being arrested and charged and initially locked up from this fascist attack on the Capitol being released.
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say quickly, I mean, I think that obviously, I think for anybody who's witnessed or been involved in the criminal justice system, it's obvious who it's geared towards. And I think even again, when whites are the defendants in these cases, they get more of the benefit of the doubt than otherwise would happen in any other criminal trial. So I think we have some other instances where we've had in the Black Lives Matter protests, where we had Black folks who were arrested, denied bail, had to sit in jails until their actual trials came upon them. And so here we have the exact opposite, where even though the press has covered this in a light that shows, that this is not going to be tolerated in terms of taking over the Capitol, still within the individual system, the whiteness itself proves to be an asset in terms of how the judge treats these folks, how they are looked upon in terms of potential bail, the lowering of charges and so forth. And so whiteness permeates how the system operates and who gets the benefit of the doubt even before trial starts, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at the silence of the police unions.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, here it is. You got 2 suspects that's been arrested
Mhm.
for the potential murder, alleged
Mhm.
murder of this cop, and yet not a peek out of the police union.
No.
I mean, they're rapidly vocal when it comes to any kind of black suspect. You know, Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, right? But there's not a blue line. Blue lives are absent. The advocates of Blue Lives Matter are absent, and there is not one that I've seen. There's not one police union representative who's even gotten on CNN and said we're glad these guys got caught. I haven't even seen that.
No.
So I mean,
No,
the hypocrisy is just amazing.
It's wild that, you know, there's one teenage suspect who was ordered released because he tested positive for COVID. But here, Mumia Abu Jamal is sitting in prison. We're trying to keep him from dying, trying to get him out so he can live, to be free. And you got police unions, you know, trying to keep him in, as well as you've had the police unions protest Jalil Muntakim being released. You've had police, well, hell, the FBI has been after Assata Shakur since, you know, forever. They protest whenever anyone mentions Sundiata Akoli being. I mean, I mean, we cannot overstate how imperative it is for us to never ever forget who and what we're fighting for in this struggle for freedom. It's not just us. And this whole idea of, you know, this movement not being our grandparents' movement, yes, it damn well needs to be.
Exactly.
This movement needs to be the movement of our elders who we are fighting for to get free from behind the walls, and the people who have gotten free, you know, who are leading us and who we're even still learning from. So, you know, as we're watching these kind of, you know, legal things happen, we're amused in a really, you know, morbid kind of way of how this system continues to perpetually remind us that it doesn't exist to give us justice. We're going to have to make that for ourselves.
And again, I just want to say quickly that when you say we have to look at the movement of our sort of parents and grandparents, and I think the reason we have to look at that movement is because that movement is the movement that has been most targeted and destroyed by the government, because the politics, as much issues that were going on within the movement, disagreements, different lines, but in general, the politics were about liberation. They were about Black liberation. And those politics threatened the very nature of the system and how it operated. They didn't, those politics, when they became radicalized, particularly in the mid to late 60s and early 70s, they were a threat to the government, and the government took that threat seriously. And I think, you know, what we have now is sort of the outcome of the destruction of that movement, which, of course, in talking about police brutality, is the idea of these activists and organizers who actually get paid by the very capitalist and big foundations, right, that we're supposed to be fighting against in a lot of ways. The ones that actually control and set up a system of policing that murders and destroys our community, or at the same time giving millions of dollars in with one hand as they're protecting a policing system on the other hand, right? And so as our movement was destroyed in the 60s and 70s, what replaced that has been sort of this nonprofit industrial complex, which we all participate in, to be honest, right? But we have to understand that that's not necessarily a liberation struggle, right? A struggle to get high salaries and to create institutions which don't challenge the system directly is not a liberation struggle, right? It's an integration struggle, hoping again that the system is going to open itself up and allow us to participate and be free within it. And as we know, the history is that that's never going to happen. The reason our political prisoners are held until they're in their late 70s and early 80s, and sometimes are forced to die in these prisons, is because it wants to teach a lesson to organizers and activists today that there may be some well-paid folks if you go around this route, but if you go another route and you challenge us directly, that we are going to bring some force onto you, right? And then we have to be brave and strong enough to understand that the reason that force was brought on our elders is because our elders were fighting a liberation struggle. No offense, not a Black Lives struggle, but a Black liberation struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, so these kinds of things will continue to go on, but we had to kind of end this spot. We're having mouse wars over here.
Right. But before we do, I just want to bring one more thing up.
Yes.
Because Kamau, you said something about being paid off the system and everything. For the last couple of days, I think there has been a lot of talk about the nonprofit industrial
complex.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes. And so the thing of it is that Tamika Mallory, and we know the thing with Black Lives Matter and a lot of those things that's been happening. And I mean, the where I want to go at, Kamau, is this. Ben Crump, old Uncle Ben Crump, has been thrown in there as being part of this crew that is profiting off of the movement. Now, I mean, to be fair, he is an attorney. And to navigate the legal system, as you know, you need officers of the court to do that. Now, is it a fair critique or criticism of Uncle Ben Crump when it comes to navigating these things? I mean, I understand he's high profile, but is it fair to attack him, in your opinion?
It's definitely fair to attack him. I mean, people like Ben, I mean, this is an Al Sharpton matter, right? Now, we left that part out is after the destruction of the liberation movement, Al Sharpton became the model of so-called Black organizing, right? Which is somebody who can get media, draw attention, settle a case, claim credit for it, extort the family, right? And then keep it moving to the next case. But yet the policing system never changed, right? The idea that policing, the way it was going to happen, was going to change was a foregone conclusion that was not what was at stake. What was at stake was a sort of performative art game in which you tried to get the system to pay out. And, and some of that is real, like families who are not necessarily politicized. What they're looking for is what they see as justice. And in America, a lot of times we judge justice by monetary givings, right? In essence, blood money in some ways, right? To be more crude about it. So that's how the system is built, to say, if we do something and you catch us, here's what we're going to do to try to make it somewhat even. And so having attorneys that do that, of course, is part of what this system is and it creates. What Crump does is travel all around the country picking up cases, even in places where, again, as Tamira's Rice mother spoke about, where he's not an expert in the state laws. So if he's not an expert in laws in Ohio, why is he taking on cases in Ohio, right? So now he has this national ambulance chasing system that allows him, because he can now say, I can get publicity for these cases and so forth, to go around and try to grab these cases up as much as possible. And I'm not saying there's not some earnestness to his belief system as to why he's doing it, but a self-examination will have to show that you are actually not doing anything to change how the system is operating. You're waiting for a death and an injury to take place, and then you're jumping in to try to get a cash reward out of it, to try to get your 1/3 and or 40% of what the legal fees are of what the settlement it is, right? And that's what the lawyers usually take or get. So the idea that even those who claim to have some radical politics come along and now are doing the same thing. We're recreating or inheriting an Al Sharpton type system, when we were the same people who demonized an Al Sharpton, rightfully so, for not only his connections to try to get Assata rearrested and working with the FBI, but his ambulance chasing ways of doing demonstrations, coming in at 5 o'clock, leaving at 8 o'clock, and then deciding that he would get a cut of the pay, and then that would be enough for him.
Right.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, okay, so you were right to call him Uncle Ben Crump then.
Yeah, that's I call it. Look, and a lot of times, look. When we say these things, it's not because I hold him in any kind of endearment. Uncle Ben Crump. Because the guy on the rice box, he wasn't my uncle either. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, let's get to the meat. Let's get to the meat of this thing. So. Bill Clinton. They're all the same old white man to me right now. Jesus Christ. But Joseph Biden and Kamala Harris, his accomplice,
right,
have passed the big old COVID relief bill, the American Rescue Act of 2021.
Right.
And there was a big deal made by Lindsey Graham about the segment in the bill that is designed to forgive loans for Black farmers, to forgive their loans up to 150%, I think, of their loans. And there was some other provision in there to provide financial redress to Black farmers. And Lindsey Graham comes out and calls that, well, that's reparations. Now, okay, that's ridiculous. It's not.
Definitely ridiculous.
But that's not why I wanted to talk to you about this, Kamau. We wanted to talk to you about this issue about who is specifically called out in this bill for receiving financial redress, who is not, and does it matter? Because what we've seen happen is that people are making the case that because Black people are not mentioned specifically in this bill, like, say, Native Americans are, what is the other, Native, Alaska Natives are, and American Indians. Now, they use those terms interchangeably almost, Native Americans and American Indians. Native Hawaiians are all called out specifically in this bill. And I actually went through the legislation, Kamau, because I am petty and and I am kind of, controlling like that. And I looked at how many times these other, designations, words are used to denote other groups of people are called out in this bill. So the word Native is used 60 times. Indian used 78 times. Native Hawaiian 17 times. American Indian 2 times. Native American 11. Alaska Native 6. Interestingly, Hispanic is only used once. So when people are claiming, the Hispanics and Latinos are called out in this bill, no, it's actually just one time and for a specific reason. But the point people make, Kamau, is that Black people in particular are not called out, singled out. There's not a line item that is specifically for Black people in this bill.
I mean, we're not even Negroes in this.
I looked for the term Negro. It's not in there. African American, not in there. African, not in there. But there is a phrase that is in this bill that is used 18 times that I think we need to understand the legal designation for, because I think this is going to answer the questions that people have. And I'm hoping that I'm right, but because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not sure. But you are. So I'm going to ask. There is this phrase called socially disadvantaged that's used 18 times in this legislation. Kamau, what is a socially disadvantaged group or person? And why is that something we should be aware of? And if it is, why? Oh, you're on mute there.
I got you. A socially disadvantaged group, it's a policy term more than it's a legal term, right? So legally speaking, you have protected classes, which covers race, sex, gender, and certain other classes, right? So those are legal classifications, but a racially disadvantaged person is more of a policy term in order to describe who gets to be included in what bill, right? And so in this particular case, racially disadvantaged is folks who've been marginalized, so-called, and can prove that they've been marginalized through sort of historical impact and so forth. What socially disadvantaged also is another way of including groups without saying Black, right? And so so some of this history, and I think some of the background materials that that you guys prepared or talked about maybe prior to this, that we talked a little bit about, some of the history of some of this socially disadvantaged grouping and or conversation does go back to the 1960s and Patrick Moynihan and the Moynihan reports, and later on his work with Nixon. So Moynihan is an interesting figure, as in he worked for both. He was a so-called liberal Democrat who worked for both Democratic administrations and Republican administrations back in the 60s and 70s. Later became a U.S. representative to the United Nations, and after that became also a senator from New York, right? And so has a long history within U.S. government. I believe also was a sociologist. Say the word for me. Sociologist. Thank you so much. Also was a sociologist. So he has a long history and was responsible for what was termed the Moynihan Report, was basically a report on the Black underclass and the breakup of the Black family, in which he famously, in that report, blamed Black women for the breakup of the Black family, and basically also alluded to Black men needed jobs as postal workers and so forth, particularly to keep them out of the radical struggle. And he demonized, obviously, the Black Panther Party and other parties and other organizing impacts, again, going back to the impact of the 60s and 70s. And so basically what we had was this sort of whitewashing idea that is still around today, is that the way that you somehow control the Negroes without mentioning the Negroes, right, is to offer some social service programs that never do enough to lift anybody in any real sense out of poverty, but does enough to say that you are dealing with the issue and or problem. And that's been the sort of the history, particularly of liberal interjection into issues of poverty and race, right, is to create programs which don't do nearly enough, but give them an opportunity to say that they've done something. You can look at Clinton in terms of welfare reform. Anything that they do, they term as this is going to help these particular people, right? But and particularly at that time, that the term again of benign neglect also started to pop up, right, a little bit later on, which is around not mentioning Black people as you're dealing with issues that are of concern to Black people and or that may target some Black folks, as a way to not rouse up, right, white supremacy. So there's always this dualism of suggesting that you're doing a little bit for the Black folks, not enough to make anything different, but you can't mention them, right? You can't mention Black people. And obviously under the Obama administration, this went full force, where Obama was able to pass legislation mentioning very specific groups that legislation was supposed to help or they'll support. But anytime there was a conversation about what could help Black people, right, there was never any specific legislation that could target Black urban areas. Jesse Jackson at one point famously, when he ran for president, put forth a so-called Black Marshall Plan. Again, he didn't necessarily talk about Black people. He talked about urban areas, but it was clear what he was talking about. Obama couldn't even go that far. Wow. Obama, even in Obamacare, was careful to say anything that helps the general populace and poor people will also help Black people, right? But he would never mention any specific policy ideas that could help or target Black communities who do obviously suffer because of white supremacy, racism, particular ills in America that may need to be addressed acutely, as opposed to general ideas of what resources can go and how they should go, right? But we know, because America is such a racist society, that will never happen, to be honest, right? And so I think these little socially disadvantaged policies that target certain communities but don't mention Black people are purposeful, because this is what sort of neoliberals think they can potentially get away with. But when they come to Black communities, they'll hope that mainstream media is not there, because then they may say what we do for you, A, B, C, D. But when they go to other communities, they won't mention that, right? And so I think we have this continual sort of game playing around how politics works in America. You can't make white people too upset. You can't make white people feel like black people are getting helped and supported. In fact, part of the history of America is social programs, welfare programs, socialistic policies, is that the majority of white people were in favor of them up until the civil rights movement of the 1960s, because they felt they were the main recipients of those endeavors. When you have the GI Bill post World War II, you had other bills that helped folks. You had obviously Social Security, post Depression, all the programs that FDR put into place that were mainly targeted towards the white poor and white working class. And white folks embraced those systems. And not only embraced those systems, they voted overwhelmingly for FDR during that time period, and white Democratic politicians, because they saw themselves getting something of substance out of it. The moment that they saw that they thought that black people would be recipients also of some social welfare policies to help, the majority of the white population to this day has turned against those policies because they see them being targeted towards an undeserving, right, black underclass that needs to pull itself up by the bootstrap the way they did, because they never did in the first place either, right? But that's the sort of the racial dynamic that we deal with when we have these policies and these programs that need to specifically target black communities and some other communities. When we talk about who the frontline workers are, we're talking about folks of color, right? When we're talking about those who've been impacted mostly by COVID and have not received the proper medical treatment, those are mostly black and other underclass folks. So you can't say that in America, because then you have the white populace who gets in an uproar, and then they start voting overwhelmingly, as they always do, for Republicans, and they vote for people like Trump. And so that's part of that game that's played within the American political system.
And it's amazing, Kamau, that you said that, because we just had proof of what you just explained. We had Obama just come out recently, just basically just verifying what you just said, where he said, yeah, in theory, with respect to reparations, oh yeah, black people should got reparations, but I was just afraid of the white backlash.
I was afraid of white people,
right,
to support it. I didn't want to do that because the white people scared me.
Right, and then you got Kamala Harris, who, that famous clip of her saying, "Well, I'm not just going to do something that's just going to help black people.
Just going to help black
right."
people.
So
rolling her neck like
all right, but my question is that why, for those out there, because trust me, there are those out there that's going to say, well, what they got to do with me? Why should we, as a demographic, Kamau, why is this important information for us?
Well, I think it sort of lends credence to why our struggle is treated the way it is, and why we, again, have to have a black liberation struggle, because you cannot expect folks who are too mealy-mouthed, right, and within the Democratic Party to do anything for you, to stand up and say who you are, even, right, except at the when we look at how the presidential elections run these days, particularly in the Democratic Party, very early on, there's a pandering to black people. But the moment those primaries are over and they turn to the general electorate, all of a sudden the conversation shifts back to what we won't be doing for black people, right? Or how folks have to straighten themselves up and so forth and so on. So we have to understand how the game is played and how it's been played for a long time. Or again, how these programs that were enacted even during the 60s and 70s that did something but never did enough. At the same time, our liberation struggles were being attacked, right? By that very same government, right? By not only just COINTELPRO and Hoover, but by the whole federal government. Hoover and the FBI would appoint people, but that was a program that was endorsed from Kennedy to Johnson to Nixon and so forth, right? That was not a program that somehow got out of hand or got away from people. The FBI was doing what they were told to do. Hoover was the point person for that work, and the federal government is responsible for the murdering and killing of black activists and organizers, radicals, revolutionaries, and other radicals and revolutionaries, right? White Communist Party, Socialist Party, Brother Underground, the Young Lords, other organizations, all of those were being attacked at the behest of the federal government. And when programs that the Panther parties put up, i.e. the breakfast program in California, right? California then adopted programs within the school system to feed young kids, but they took the politics out of it. Right? And so that's what they do. They take the politics out of it to try to put us back to sleep and to think that somehow this system is going to work for us, when again, it's never enough to lift us really out of poverty. It's never enough to give us any power in this system. It's never enough that we control the institutions and the organizations that can run our lives. But we are still at the beck and call of a Democratic Party and of a national government that does only what it has to do to simmer the masses down. And then what it does is continue to do the work that it does on an everyday basis, which is to make sure that the corporate entities, that the elite are satisfied, that the wealth of the tax base goes to them, goes to make them richer, that they don't have to pay their fair share of taxes. That's the system that we're battling. And so when we have these programs that come into place, they will never do enough to satisfy us, or we should never be satisfied, because we understand that no system which oppresses us is ever going to give us the reparations that are needed to liberate us. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend all that time oppressing us in the first damn place, right?
Exactly. And I want to share what give you the visual representation of what Kamau was talking about with this phrase, policy phrase, socially disadvantaged. The highlighted section is all of the people, the groups of people who are included in what the policymakers say are socially disadvantaged people. Now, I think the issue I have, Kamau, is that some people will look at this and be angry at the other people who are lumped into this group of folks,
right, and
say, these, here we are at the beginning, at the top of the list, right? Black Americans, right? And at first, I'm going to be honest, this is full disclosure. Mm-hmm. At first, I looked at this list and I said, well, what if this is kind of like a recipe? If you've ever looked at like the ingredients on a package of bread, and you know how they tell you, the nutritionists always tell you, well, the first ingredient is the most important. That's the thing. It's the most that's in the thing. Well, yeah, that's not how this works at all. Well, and I can readily admit that I did not understand just how messed up this is. It's not at all like the ingredients on a nutrition package. It doesn't really matter that Black people are the first people in the list. The issue is when someone commented a little bit earlier, when we're talking about the allocation of money, the budget allocation, that the socially disadvantaged group, anyone in this and everyone in the socially disadvantaged group is allocated, then we're talking about a pot of money that can be allocated among all of these people.
Exactly.
All of them. And this is not to say that all of these people at some point shouldn't be allocated money for, the racism and the discrimination that they encountered. But if we're talking about the issues of redressing Black people's oppression, that is a specific thing. Mm-hmm. But Kamau, the danger here is that we don't traipse over into the territory of blaming other folks for the crimes, again, of white supremacist policymakers who are denying justice economically to Black people in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious that that the history of white supremacy impacts and all folks have stories about how that impacts us, right? Or impacts different groups. The history of patriarchy. There's stories, there's history, there's incidents, there's a lineage of how that impacts people, right? But I would hold out that Black people in particular, right, have a certain story of enslavement and racism, that it's not about demonizing anybody else or not saying other people have not historically and currently suffered under a white supremacist system. Is to suggest that the idea that somehow these marginal policies are going to impact and or affect the lives of Black people in a way that will lift us up out of the poverty, out of the social malaise that this society has put us in through its white supremacist policies. It is ridiculous, right? And so to suggest that somehow pointed reform and or radical legislation will be needed in order to do that, right? There has to be a seizing of the apparatus of the state in some sense. And that's the way in which we will have redress. We will never have redress for the ways in which our folks have been treated under a system that is, again, a white supremacist system through the mechanisms or the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, right? Those policies are not meant to solve the problems of not only our folks, but of the poor in general. Those folks, again, those policies are meant to subdue us into submission. And so we have to have some clear ideas and thoughts when we see these policies and we see how they're being traped out and who they impact. And we look at what was given and we look at what was not given, right? $15 minimum wage was something was not given, right? Healthcare for all, which was something that was not given. So things that could, if you wanted to show me that you had an interest in lifting up all boats or all people, right? What you would do is do something which would have fair wages and health care and job guarantees and income minimums. Then that would be a way in which you could show me you would be lifting up this is the boats of all people, right? But that's not even close to being on the plate. And in particular, Black folks are never going to, I just want to reiterate again, are never going to be given adequate compensation and or reparations in a system that is based on white supremacy, that is based on the oppression, the enslavement, right, of Black people, the free labor and then cheap labor of Black folks. That's not going to be rewarded in a system of white supremacy. And if we think it is, if we think that that's what's going to happen with these policies, then we're doing ourselves a disservice by calling ourselves radicals or organizers or activists who claim to be working on behalf of the Black community.
So what would you say about, because you just answered what my next question was going to be, because I take the same position that you just took. But what about those that say, well, look, Kamau, you know, I hear what you're saying, and you know, in a perfect world, yeah, you know, we take over the government and Africanize everything, and you know, and we'll get our just due. But this is what we're dealing with right now. This is our reality. I would agree with you what you're saying, but what about a third party? What about if we all got together and just elected the you know, the Umoja Unity African Socialist Party or something like that? Will that help us, or what can we do?
I think it's always good, you know, even as an organizer, you have to create models of resistance. But you also have to be clear about what your final objectives are. If we think that under the current system, by creating a third party, that's going to bring about radical change with the two parties standing, and that we're going to vote our way out of this mess, then we've made not only a tactical error, we've made a sort of philosophical and historical error, and we've still based on our ideology betrayed it, because we sometimes think, even as radicals, that we can ease our way out of oppression, right?
Right.
And we have to come with the boldest, most militant stances sometimes to let folks understand that even as we're doing some of these models and creating some of these alternative institutions, that basically what we're doing is pushing the state. And basically what we're saying to the state is that once you give us A, we're going to ask for B. And once you give us B, we're going to ask for C, right? Because we understand that nothing is going to be satisfactory under the current conditions. As long as capital controls, we're under a system of capitalism, and that capital controls the economics and therefore then the politics of this country, we're in a war, right? We're in a war for our very survival. And that survival is not going to be won by voting for Joe Biden. Again, these are policies, these are practices that we've been doing now for 60 years.
Right.
For 60 years, we've been voting for the lesser of two evils. And again, since the 1970s, it's been the dominant strategy of movement activities in terms of civil rights movement activities. And it's been the dominant strategy because it's been the strategy that's been allowed to survive, right? The other strategies have been killed off. And then the strategies that have been put in its place have been creating allowing safe Negroes
Exactly.
to run for office, this mixed leadership class to represent us. And just because they're Black, we assume that somehow they have some of our best interests at heart, and they turn around and do the same things that the white liberals and moderates did before them. The same gentrification that is taking place in New York City under a white liberal is taking place here in Atlanta under a Black liberal. Right? The same issues of a lack of social mobility that's taking place in conservative cities with large, somewhat large Black populations are taking place in liberal cities with large Black populations, right? So these paradigms stay in place even if the face of the so-called leadership changes. And we can't be, as organizers, radicals, and revolutionaries, people who are reading about racial capitalism or Marx and other things, fall into any trap whatsoever that leads us to believe that anything short of radical reconstruction, of revolutionary change, is going to do anything to alleviate the blight that our communities suffer under. We must control every and any institution that has an impact on our lives. And if we don't control it, we must destroy it. And unless we are under that kind of a dichotomy around how this system works, we are creating a false narrative for our people. When we go out and say, if we vote for this one, this is how much the system is going to change, and we're going to have this different type of lifestyle because now we've elected a Black woman as opposed to a white man, right? It didn't work when we elected Black men in these political positions, and it's not going to work when we elect Black women in these political positions, and it's not going to work when we elect Black LGBTQ people in these positions. The system is the system. And unless we understand that and operate from that vantage point, we're going to continue making the same mistakes and or creating the same errors that have been created since the 1970s, when most of our political apparatus that had a radical edge to it was destroyed by this very system.
Right.
Ooh, Black Power Media. I mean, look, this is what you get on this channel for real. You ain't gonna hear Jimmy Dore talk about this. You're not gonna hear real progressives talk about it. Because they're going to be sticking with their monetary moment, MMT. They're going, they all, but you're not going to hear this type of conversation, which is sorely needed. So this is I'm just reminding y'all out there again. This is why this platform is dangerous. It's going to keep dangerous, and this is the type of conversations that we're about on Black Power Media. So if you haven't join, and also share this video and other videos content with on your platform. Tell your friends about it, tell your family members about it. Because this is how this type of change that we all say we want, this is how this change happens. Each one teach one. I mean, that still is a thing, y'all.
Yeah. So I mean, I just feel like, because I do love the history part of these conversations, because I think this is a part of the issue that we have in this current moment, that, we think we have to recreate the wheel. And I do believe there is an important utility for Black radical political parties that are working class and poor focused and led, because something has to be in existence to fill the void when this system does topple over. So yeah, we do need people in our communities involved in the political process, so that when the system is destroyed, people are not like, oh, now what do we do? No, we keep doing what we do. But I think it's important for us to be clear that this is not, some new thing. Sorry, I need my mouse.
Okay. All right.
This is not some new thing that we're talking about. We talked earlier about Moynihan, and I just want to show you this. This is from the New York Times that was published in March of 1970. I love technology and the ability to reach back in time.
That's like a time machine.
It is like a time machine. This is an actual microfiche capture of the New York Times article back in 1970, where Daniel Patrick Moynihan first used the phrase benign neglect. And it tells you in this article the context in which he used it. It was in a memorandum to President Richard Nixon, where Moynihan said that, this is right here on the screen, we're not making this up, that Negroes have made extraordinary progress. Now, for those of you who are not as old as we are, please understand that we didn't make that much extraordinary progress, because the working class and poor, yes, the black middle class was growing, but the black underclass was still living in crushing poverty and oppression. And truth be told, black middle class their asses were being kicked by the cops too, still. So Moynihan was just straight lying from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
But he said the time may have come when the issue of race could benefit from a period of benign neglect. He goes on to explain to Nixon in this memorandum his reasoning. He said extremists of either race, they've been using that line about us for years, that we who are fighting for justice are extremists on the same level as the racist white people who kill people who want freedom. They've been using this for years. And this was the liberal Democrat now. Okay? The memorandum described a virulent form of anti-white feeling among black lower classes. Oh, I don't know. Maybe because of this thing called racism that, the black lower classes were still living under. I don't know, maybe. That, white people were perpetuating. And here's the key that I see some folks who I think some of their intentions are probably maybe pure. I'm not entirely sure, but this is where they get off track. Where Moynihan, and this is how I know this is like some agent shit that they do.
Right.
Sorry, it just looks like it, because this is why. Moynihan is telling Nixon to stop talking about race in public and policy. Don't say you're going to do stuff for black people. What we should do instead, Moynihan says, is that a greater attention to Indians, Mexican Americans, and Puerto Ricans would be useful.
And I guess we can add to the list LGBT now.
Well, yeah.
Q, right.
Yeah. He said the report asserted that Negro problems had been too much talked about and too much taken over to hysterics, paranoids, and I guess that's boodlers on all sides. Now, listen, I'm going to drop this link if I can get this mouse to work. Okay, I need to get a new mouse. I need to stop being cheap and just go on to the store and get a new mouse.
So Kamau, so what does, so that right there, because you gave us a little history about that from the beginning. So this basically explains why, as you said before, why it basically, Moynihan was just telling Nixon, just don't talk about it.
And it's interesting,
folks instead.
Yeah. And the other part about this is interesting is that you notice how white folks are always talking to other white folks about race, right? Mm-hmm. And we're always the object of the conversations, right? Not the drivers of the conversations. Mm-hmm. He obviously had no interest in knowing why, whatever idea he thought about why black folks may be upset with white folks. He had no interest with understanding why that may be. I'm not saying even his data was accurate in terms of how he termed it, but he still had no interest whatsoever in understanding how that was or why that was. What he's interested in is how do you keep white power going, right? How do you keep a system of white power going? And again, how do you control the black masses, right? What do you give them that's just enough? How do you control even the white masses? How do you make sure that they stay in check and that they stay within this realm of Democrat and Republican politics? And how do they, at this particular stage in history now, begin to think about how they're going to continue to peel off that white vote as that shift was happening, right? We're talking about the 1970s now. That shift of the white population that used to vote Democrat, particularly in the South, had already now started to vote for Republicans. Moynihan, even though he was obviously working for Nixon at the time, still a liberal Democrat, was also concerned about what was it that was going to keep that white populace slightly even, enough of them to retain future votes for their party. So all of that, it's in play, but all of that is about basically how do we keep this two-party system going? How do we keep white folks in control? How do we shut up the black militants in particular? And again, at the same time, these other institutions are working to destroy militant operations, organizations, and kill people. So that's all part and parcel of the game that's being played at the same time. And so I think it's no coincidence, and it's interesting how the white liberal is the lead usually, right, in making suggestions and ideas around how to control the black masses, right? The Republicans and or the conservatives are happy if we just go die off, and or are happy with strictly locking us up, right? They're just completely happy with that. The liberals, who now can no longer get the white vote as much as they used to, want us to do some voting for them, but still don't want to hear our voice, don't want to hear our issues, don't care about what we think, how this system works, right? They're there as you know, Dr. King famously wrote in the Birmingham letter, you know, the white liberals want us to be patient and unassuming and quiet and calm, and to let them take the lead, and or to let their self-appointed blacks take the lead for us, right? And as long as that, again, is the system that is in control, we will never, ever break free and create institutions and organizations and systems of governance that solve the problems, and the problems are solvable, of poverty, of racism, of white supremacy, and of black people having black liberation at the forefront of our struggle.
And how much of this, Kamau, do you think? I was watching a video earlier today with Kwame, the late Kwame Ture, and they were discussing Black Power. This video was probably around about the early 90s. And one of the things that they were bringing up, that Angela Davis was lamenting about the state of Black America in that time. And it just seems that what's one thing that's consistent in this white supremacist country is that every time we have a Black convention, or what was the Black State of the Union, you know, it's always despair. It's always, so that was one thing. But Angela Davis, her comments was like, that she was really lamenting about the position that Black people were in at that time, and that she didn't see any hope for the Black community. Kwame Ture, when he was asked about what he thought about what she said, he said, well, he says the best of times is the worst of times. And he said that meaning that, yeah, I mean, we could look at what our position is as far as our progress from the civil rights era and the Black Power movements. But he said that Black people are becoming more conscious. And he said, and so he was naming examples of areas where Black people were starting to wake up and improve in. So I bring that to say that all that we mentioned tonight, and seeing that there really isn't any this benign neglect was all orchestrated in order, as you say, to perpetuate white supremacy, to also cement our underclass status when it comes to politics and all. But what I've seen in this last election is a growing number of Black people are starting to understand that. They might not know benign neglect. They might not know about the Moynihan report. They might not know any of this. But I've seen a lot of memes circulating, especially one where the Democrats was riding this SUV and they threw the Black person out the bus, and other memes like that. And even in my conversations with other Black people during this election, I mean, there's a understanding that, something's not right here. We just had the first Negro president for 2 terms, and I think that his presidency actually started to flick on the switch of a lot of us. So what do you say about that? Has this policy that the Democrats hold on to so dearly, is it also going to hurt them, or has it hurt them?
Well, I think we're already in a period. I don't want to go as far as to call it a third Reconstruction period, but I already think we're in this sort of tumultuous period in sort of the American project history, right? And again, we can look back at the Civil War, where again the more liberal whites were like, look, the slavery thing has got to end because it's messing up the bigger industrial project, right? And the conservatives were more like, no, don't mess with our way of life. And they fought a war over it, right? And then they accepted them back after they defeated them. And then we had the 1960s and 1950s, where white liberals were like, look, there's a little opening that needs to happen because we have international issues that we're trying to solve. And we can't have shit in the street at this level, right, where we're trying to protect U.S. hegemony around the world. So there's also that idea of the white liberals, again, saying we're going to take the lead on this and we're going to show you how to deal with the Negro question, right? And I think we're having this period again that has started to sort of prop up, obviously, since the Great Recession and the election of Barack Obama, where the idea of who benefits from America, how resources are distributed, I think the demographic shifts are really at play, particularly in terms of the white hostility that's happening in this particular country. So I think I should say, I think we're in this period, which will probably go on for at least another 20 or 30 years of potentially the dismantling of the American project. And not necessarily because we as a people, as Black folks, are the leading liberatory edge of that, but because of white fascism will make it impossible for us to continually live the lives that we believe living, even at sort of the most marginal base in which we've been doing it, and with the openings that have been created, particularly for the someone put up the comprador class of Black folks, which are sort of the higher level middle class Black folks who try to get to lead us. That is still now an unsustainable position because white reactionaryism has now come back at the forefront of the country, and these white folks, we end kind of like where we started, who as both individuals and as an organized force. There's one thing I will say about white folks: they will not be led by other people, right? They will destroy it, and they will separate themselves and cause for secession way before we will en masse, in order to protect their ability to control themselves and go back to enslaving others in order to protect that white supremacy, right? So we're in a period of readjustment. And I think there is some awakening that I think in some ways I will credit some of the Black Lives Movement for doing, in terms of at least opening up some language. Obviously, this movement started, whether or not I think it's it's because of the movement is a different conversation. But what's been termed the Black Lives Movement started under Obama, right? The first Black president, was like this reawakening of Black resistance, right? And again, we can talk about how some of that has been captured, movement capture, which has taken place also. But what we've had is a reawakening of some sorts, and a discussion and a battle, like and similar to the 60s and 70s, of different Black ideologies and what that means for us as a future, right? What's resistance means, what self-determination means, what's radicalism means, what's nationalism means, what's Black feminism means, right? What are these radical discussions that we're having are happening now at a pace that they haven't been seen in 30 or 40 years. And I think that's all being played out now. And so I think it's going to be a confluence of interests that we're going to all have to deal with during this particular time period. And we're going to have to challenge each other, right? To see which ideas make the most sense for us to move forward in a liberation struggle. I stress that part, in a liberation struggle. Reform struggles, moderate integration struggles, not down for that. But for liberation struggles, there's discussions and debates and questions to be had in terms of how we move this forward, because whether we like it or not, others are going to be pushing against us. And they will use any means they see needed and necessary to preserve what they see as their liberty. And even if that includes not only our continued oppression, but our subjugation at a level that we probably haven't seen since the 60s and 50s and 40s. All of that is on the table. And so unless we're prepared to fight, we are going to die in this country as slaves.
And I think that's really the most important part of this discussion for us, Kamau. This delineation, the clear delineation of which struggle people are in. If you're in a reform struggle, okay, fine, but understand that's not where we are.
Exactly.
That's not what's going to get us free. Reform is just going to get, the toe of the boot off some of our necks, perhaps for a very short period of time. We're talking about freedom and liberation for all people. So we cannot do that being at each other's throats. And we can't do that being at the throats and the necks of other people who are also oppressed with that have the neck on their boot also. So this is why I really wanted to have this discussion, to see on a policy level how these folks who represent the system use words and definitions and who they say is what and what not, and how they frame their ideas to keep the system exactly the way it is, and how they know that they use these words to keep us at each other's throats.
Right.
I mean, you know, people are always talking about, oh, we got to be on code. You need to decipher their code. That's what we're trying to help you understand, that this is, I mean, it's not even a code anymore. It's out there. It's that they're telling you that we want to make the situation so that we talk about other groups of people we're oppressing, so that we ignore Black people who we're also oppressing.
Right.
And then the Black people that we're oppressing, they're angry at the people that we're talking about, while we keep oppressing all of them and making all the money. That's the code. That's the code we need to figure out.
Yeah, and I think it also really highlights how, you know, there is no such thing as being apolitical. You know, I mean, what we just brought out now, you hear Black folks all the time talking about, well, I'm not into that. I'm not into it. But politics affects our life, whether you're into it or not, you know, and I'm just so glad we did have this discussion because now we know why Baltimore remained the same for the last 30 years, why Camden, New Jersey, and also why when developers and you know, and people with money decide that they want to turn West Baltimore into paradise, or East Camden into paradise, why it's so easy for them to do that, and it was so hard for us to do it.
Right, because paradise was never for us, and they just never came out and said, not for the Negroes. They used a whole bunch of other terms. But okay, this is the last thing we wanted to talk about. This is I don't know if you saw this, Kamau, but this was so amusing to us, and I think this goes right in line. Where is it? There it is. This goes right in line with our discussion, the part of this discussion about the Black Miss Leadership class, the Black faces in high places, and really what Black people control and what we don't. For as long as we've been listening to Lou Rawls, you know, rest in peace. I think he is dead, isn't he?
Lou Rawls been dead, but
okay. I mean, but as long as we've been listening to Lou Rawls talking about giving to the United Negro College Fund, I did not know all those years that a Black person was not on a chair, was not a chairman of the board of the United Negro College Fund.
That you know, that really pissed me off. I said all the money that I done sent Lou Rawls, and mine is a terrible thing to waste.
My lady loved my ass.
But yeah, mine was a terrible thing to waste. And you know, and the thing of it is that, well, I guess a chair a chair was a terrible thing to waste too.
I guess that chair was a terrible thing. Now, did you know this?
I think I made the same assumption that by now there would have been a head or a leader of the United Negro College Fund who was Black. I mean, I'm not totally shocked by this because obviously, again, you know the history of the NAACP, right, which was mostly led by white folks for decades before Black leadership sort of assumed that role. And again, when Black leadership assumed the role, it almost was like it made no difference. And so I'm assuming the same thing happens here. And, you know, one of the things about our historically Black colleges is that, again, they do some really great things, but as an institution, they don't do any good radical things, right? They downplay radicalism. They're ready to expel radical students. The resources that they go after, those same heads of those Black colleges were more than happy to meet with Donald Trump, knowing that Donald Trump sort of got into office by supporting an overt white supremacist policy, right? But for the nickel and dimes that he might give, that was well worth a visit for them and a praying with him. And that's the kind of ideas that we get from these Black institutions, which have accepted the nickels and dimes off the tables, the scraps off of the tables of white supremacy, because they like their positions, they feel good about their individual positions, they want to play that game. And so whether or not the Black masses suffer or not is really none of their concern. And so again, until we either take over these institutions or destroy them or replace them with new ones, we're always going to be in this place of having these organizations which really don't do anything towards changing our actual conditions, except for moderating the lives that we live, giving us some representation in politics, showing us somebody that we need to aspire to. That's all they can offer for us, but they can't offer the sort of kind of change that we need, the radicalization that we need to make the institutions that we need as a people to overcome the oppression that we face.
Right. And yes, Lou Rawls did pass away in 2006.
Yeah, I know, it was a while. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'm still mad at him because, come on.
I mean, look, he was just getting a paycheck all them years, like, but all right, but this is the thing. So Kamau, I mean, we appreciate it. We're at the end of our time.
Yes, we are.
And man, we just appreciate you hanging out with us, man. I know you dealing with your baby. We dealing with our baby over here and everything, man. I'm serious. And also we look, I gotta say this, Jackie.
What?
I am proud the way the chat went today.
I
mean, it was kind of troll free today, man.
Great today. It's banning trolls is a beautiful thing.
Yes, it was. I mean, y'all guys, man. Y'all are great. And just remember that one of the things that we talked about today, and one of the things that the Luqmans, what we always try to stress is that we believe that that we should have control of our culture. We should have control of our economics, and we should have control of our environment and our
education,
our spirituality.
Exactly. We should control our own shit.
Right.
We should control all of our shit.
Exactly. And our institutions should be by us, for us, and all of those things. This is our creed. And as we see that, unless we do that, everybody else is just going to give us the benign neglect shit. So so this is what we've been happening. So we can do that, and it starts with having conversations like we're having today. So chop that up, Kamau, man. We appreciate you, love you, man, and and shout out to Renegade Culture and all of the other hosts on Black Power Media, and the People's Prophetess.
Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly gave me that name, and I don't know what to do with it, but okay. So I guess this is the benediction now. So.
Right.
Embrace
it. That's right.
I'm trying. I'm bad at it. But anyway, definitely. Thank you, Kamau. We appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Everybody in the chat. We love y'all. Like, share, all that kind of stuff. Join Black Power Media. And look, have a great rest of your week. As the Eternal Chairman Fred Hampton always said, I say to you, peace, if you're willing to fight for it. And damn it, we got to fight for it. So y'all take care of yourselves. Peace.
I believe the children are our future.
No.
Teach them well and let them lead the
Lord
way.
Have mercy.
Show them all the beauty they possess inside.
How they came and they on top and I'm a mile up. Had them on line before I dial up.